I summon forth balls of fire to destroy my enemies. I counter your balls of fire with my counterspell, which just wins. But my power is limitless. Yeah, but my counterspell just really works because, well, it's such a simple roll and it just, you're counted. I summon forth demons to destroy you! Yeah, I counter those as well. And then, because I have all of this other stuff, I then cast you into an interdimensional prison. Ha ha! I counter your casting of interdimensional division. No, you can't counter it because I've got all of these other little spells that I've got preloaded which cause your counterspell to fail before my spell goes off, so my prison dimensional spell goes off and you're cast out into interdimensionals. Whose rules are we playing by? Hello and welcome to this episode of How to Be a Great GM. My name is Guy and today we're looking at magic problems. Now, before we start, I just want to say that you should hit the bell button, that's the Goblin Bell button down below, if you want to get notified when new videos are going to release, and they pretty much release now mainly on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays and Fridays. So there you are. And if you haven't heard yet, you can join me live 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Friday nights and on Monday nights, where we do Friday Twitch discussions about your games coming up, and Twitch Day, which is where we recover from Monday and look ahead at the week that we can then do stuff for our games on the weekend. Anyway, so if you haven't joined us for that yet, have a look and have a check out. The links are down below. All right, so magic problems. What are the problems with magic? Magic is inherently a problem, and sometimes we just don't think about it too much, and sometimes we think about it too much, and sometimes there's not really too much to think about. So it's a bit complicated. What are the problems with magic? Well, primarily magic does kind of violate a whole bunch of things that make sense. And once you take sense out of the equation, it becomes very difficult to control the entire situation. What can not normally be done in reality can suddenly now be done with the power of magic. And I'm not just talking the arcane kind of spells, hocus pocus kind of magic. I'm talking about all kinds of magic, including the divine magic, natural magic, all the different types of magic that one can encounter in your various role-playing systems. And most systems, they try and balance it out as best as they can, but they don't actually balance out the effect that magic has in the environment in which the game is set. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at the pros and cons of trying to actually make magic work within your system. So let's kick it off with balance. Now, when we look at balance, and nothing happens because the machine is not doing its thing, but when we look at balance, less is more, unless more is less. So keep balance. What that basically means is, if in your campaign world you have set it that it is a very low magic setting, and a lot of players, like a lot of GMs anyway, and players too for that matter, like to set the environment as a low-level magic environment. That means that mages are not very common. Most priests or lay preachers, that is, that they don't have the capacity to heal and invoke the power of their gods. Paladins are these very rare champions, the Knights of the Round Table, if you like, and all of the other kinds of magical forms are just not really there. There's a problem with that, though. It does mean that the moment that the mage in the party wanders into town and starts throwing magic around, they're a very distinct anomaly in an environment where it generally wouldn't be. Now, you just have to look at traveling magicians, not necessarily today, because we're kind of over all of these magic tricks that we get to see. We still enjoy them, absolutely, and the world would be lesser if we didn't have Penn and Teller. On the other hand, if you go back 100 years and you've got people who can magically appear from one side of the stage to the other, that really was a miracle and magic. It did cause quite a storm, however, and word spread very quickly of these individuals. Go back 400 years before that, and suddenly those same individuals are now being burnt at the stake or thrown into a lake to see if they float. The idea is that if you have a low-level magic setting, you need to make sure that your players recognize that it's a low-level magic setting and don't just wander around willy-nilly casting cantrips to entertain the kids all the time. It might work for Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, but on the other hand, everyone respects Gandalf as this ultra-powerful being. And, well, let's just face it, The Lord of the Rings was quite a happy setting. There were no assassins out to make their name and take out Gandalf. Not that they could have, because he was a really high-powered level wizard. But if he was a low-level wizard and he was still casting all those little magic tricks and things, would he have been in such a good position? I don't know. He certainly gets noticed wherever he goes. So that's something that you should think about in a low-level magic setting and make sure that your players think about as well. On the other hand, if you go to the other extreme and you say magic is the most common thing on whatever planet they're on, and that almost everybody has access to some kind of magical ability, which Dungeons & Dragons 4th edition basically did, if you do that kind of thing, then a sorcerer casting cantrips gets no more than a glance as, say, a musician standing at an airport playing a guitar and singing a song. Yeah, they might make some money because people feel guilty because they stand there and watch them because they're more interesting than the flight boards, but that's really not the greatest sort of audience that one could possibly want. And I take my hats off to people who can play music, just as an aside. So the idea of more magic, that magic is so common that it's everywhere, well, that's absolutely fine. But then it must be treated as such as well. And I tend to think that magic, if it is that common, starts to become a little bit more like Terry Pratchett's magic from his Discworld series, where it's used more as a mechanical device than something that's actually useful. The balance, of course, is somewhere in between, where you've got these mage academies which try to regulate the amount of magic that floats around in the world and restrict the powers and so on of the individuals who wander around, aka Dragon Age, and the like, where mages are all registered and kept and looked after by some very, very militant non-magic users. So those are the sort of the three states, and you can find a state in between. But just bear in mind, once you've kind of chosen a state, then you know, hoods, this is why we don't wear hoods, because it really mucks up one's hairstyle, doesn't it? Absolutely. I mean, how many times has a paladin stopped to have to fix his hair? Oh, well, it is what it is, and that's what it is. It's hood hair. Anyway, so I got distracted, sorry. So you have to decide what is the balance of magic in your world, and then you need to try and stick to it. You have to keep the balance. Keep it there. Don't suddenly overbalance it. Or if you do, make sure that it's part of your campaign and that they need to understand why magic is suddenly unbalanced. That's not a new story either. Now, you could just plead ignorance. You could say, you know what, this is too much thought going on here. This is a game. We don't have to think that much. You'd be absolutely right. You don't have to think that much. You can just go with rules as written. So yes, you can cast magic. Great. Okay, good. Those are the spells you can cast. Fantastic. Those are the mechanics, how they work. And you do that in the world. No one cares. No one flinches. No one bats an eye. Yeah, there's probably a couple mages every now and again as I need them for my NPCs. And other than that, that's pretty much it. You are the wizard and well done. And you need a magic academy. Great. It's over there. There it is. See, it's called the Magic Academy. You can go and buy magical stuff from it. Because, you know, that's in the book. So good, great, lovely. Now, what it does mean is that things don't really matter for the mage. The mage is just like a regular fighter. That might be a good thing. It might make everyone feel as if they're equal. What it does, though, is it does give you some lost opportunities to play around with that particular character class, that character type. Magic users are no more interesting than a common thief or a beggar, for that matter. So you have some lost opportunities there. What also happens is you don't necessarily then get to put the party under too much pressure. If every village has got an enchanter and a priest who can cast all these wonderful spells, well, the party can just sort of move around and do as necessary. You can also stick to the, well, it's a percentile roll when I create my village, so there's a 20% chance there's a priest around. Yep, there's a priest around. Great, you can do that. I think it's taking some of the agency away from you and making your world feel as if it's basically just been taken straight out of the book. Again, there's nothing wrong with that if that's how you like to play, and if your players enjoy playing in that world, even better. For those that might want to put a little bit more thought into their world, these are the kinds of things you need to take into consideration. Now, importantly, you need to push the boundaries, or at least you don't get to push the boundaries when you are going with raw. When you're going with raw, it is as it's written, and we will just take it as it is. Now, don't think for a second that I'm advocating that you're going to change how the rules for spells work, or that you're going to change how the divine powers work. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that if you look at a generic fantasy setting, you've got a sprinkling of mages, quite a lot of priests running around, and that's about it. There's no real thought into how these things are necessarily organized, pardon me. You don't get to push boundaries. You don't get to necessarily have these cataclysmic events where there's suddenly this powerful mage who's sweeping through the kingdom and heroes are required to stop him. Because the mage will get stopped at the first village because there's 15 wizards there and a dozen priests. Depending on how your dice rolled, of course. So it creates this space that doesn't really have much cohesion. It doesn't really feel like a well-fleshed out world, in my humble opinion, and that's why I'm making this video. It is just a space, and it kind of happens. And so the magic users won't feel special. Should the magic users feel special? Well, they've got all these magical powers and things, and they're no longer as weak as they used to be in the past, so no, maybe they shouldn't. Maybe we should all be absolutely equal. In which case, then, why are we... Yeah, anyway. All right, so ignorance, just going with them as they are written, I think denies you the opportunity to put your own personal stamp on the environment and to make sure that that environment feels real and feels as if you have created something of your own, rather than just kind of gone with the generic rules. Now, you could also go in the opposite direction where you try and work it out. You kind of go, okay, so this is how it's going to work. I'm going to have... This is my mage academy, and this is the hierarchy that goes with it, and this is the thing, and this is the thing, and this is the thing. Great. Now, players, when you create a wizard, you have to go through 17 years of academic studies. Here are the course notes that you will be learning. You need to remember all of those different tiers of, potions and cantrics, which is what they did in Harry Potter, by the way, and it worked really, really, really well. So it is something to think about. It's not that insane, actually, when you think about it. So you can go and develop the Mages Academy, and then you've got the Divine Temples, where there's training and there's limitations. If your world has lots of magic, how does it then deal it? So you can work it out by going, okay, well, if they have magic, then they probably don't have this, they don't have this, they don't have that, they don't have this, they don't have farmers anymore because, well, create food and water is a lot cheaper, faster, and less labor intensive than sending a peasant out to a field for an entire 6 months. God, what a silly idea. Well, we used to do that, and then we got magic. Now we basically just send half of the kids off to divinity schools so they can learn just up to level 3 spells, because after that it's all just death and damage and destruction and seeing the future, and it gets messy when you have a whole bunch of kids freaking out about, global warming and the like. So we'd rather just keep them downtrodden, down low, so they can just use the, create food and water, purify, those kinds of little basic things that allow modern day society to flourish. So if that's what you want to do, that's fantastic. But you have to point out the limits to your players. And you have to think about, why are there limits? So if magic is something that has to be inherently part of your genetics, inherently part of your DNA, then that's fantastic. But you need to work that out and say, well, that is why. If it isn't, if it's something that can just be learned, like, say, quantum mechanics can just be learned by anyone, apparently, although I think it's a genetic thing because I can't figure out quantum mechanics. Anyway, so if it's something like that where anyone can learn it, well, then why wouldn't everyone learn it? To be perfectly honest with you, yes, it's nice to be a big warrior and swing your sword and go around and bash things. But if you can create a magical sword, fly around and become invisible so you can bash things from behind, why wouldn't you do that instead? Again, these are the kinds of questions that you need to then ask yourself and then actually have answers for. So that's why I've called it insanity, because you start down the rabbit hole of going, well, if magic did exist, then this is what it would probably have done. This is how it would have changed things. And you start to have debates. Would there have perhaps been dragons who were the original races that had magic, and that they desperately tried to control the magic that the lesser races got? Maybe that's a thing. Is it that the elves, in all of their imperialness, decided that they were going to control how magic works? Perhaps that's a thing. Is it that the academies were set up? Maybe there aren't any academies. Maybe mages rule the world, and so the mages limit the access that one has to spells and spell-like abilities. Anyway, those are all the different kinds of ideas. What is the power that is available, and how freely is it available, and what's the cost for getting that power as well? If you look at our ancient history, our ancient Greeks and things, people were sent off to become scribes and gain the power of reading, which they never really exercised. They weren't ever the leaders and things because their leaders learned how to read as well, but they were certainly positioned higher up than the average pleb who just used a sword and shield. So that's something to think about too. Now, we take the middle approach. So I've given you the two extremes where we kind of just go over as the rules are written, and then the extreme where we try and work out how magic would actually affect the world and we go mad whilst we rewrite history. Then, of course, we go with acceptance, and you make a call and then you stick to it. So you go, well, there's mage academies dotted around and they keep a registry of all the mages, but no one really exercises any authority over it, and there's not a huge sort of mage grouping really. It's a small club. Most people know each other. Priests don't usually practice the divine because the gods don't like giving their power out all the time. It gets tiring. And that's what we're going to do. I'm going to stick to that. And then don't violate those rules yourself. That's the important thing, is with the magic system, which sits over and above your rule system, don't violate it. Don't destroy it yourself in-game. And if you do, make sure that you have a very good plot reason for it and that your player characters can go and stop it from continuing to happen. That's the important thing as well, is that they can then go and stop it or maybe abuse it and use it themselves. You then need to test what you've decided upon, whether you've decided to create your own world or whether you've decided to go with rules as written or somewhere in between. You need to test it and decide upon it and then refine it and learn from it and go, well, no, that once everybody had access to first level spells, the whole world kind of blew up and came to an end, which does sound like an interesting campaign setting, a post-apocalyptic fantasy world. It's like a Savage Lands, I suppose. I know that there's several out there, but it is something that one could explore as well, if you particularly wanted to. So we test and we decide, and then we learn from it, and we go, well, that did not work very well. As is the case of some of the rule systems that have come out, you test and you learn. So those are my thoughts on magic problems and how you can think about them. I haven't given you too much necessarily to work on, and the reason for that is because it's personal. As each GM takes to their own kind of battlefield with their own players, you have to decide how you want to use magic. Maybe you don't want to include it too much, maybe you want to include more of it. It's entirely at your own discretion, and it is something that I think we need to look at. I do think it is something that we need to look at, and not just sort of sit back and go, wow, whatever the rule book says is how it works. You need to think of consequences, and you need to think of the reactions of the ordinary people to it. Do you have to make your own world? No, I don't think so. You can, of course, absolutely do so, and that would be fantastic if you really wanted to go that far. But then you have to share that with your players so they don't suddenly get caught off guard when they cast an alarm spell and they set off 50 more alarm spells because they used magic in a town which is illegal. Those are the kinds of things that you would have to let them know because they wouldn't know that growing up. So there is a lot to think about when it comes to magic in your world, and I hope that I've sparked it just a little bit. Now, if you want to get more alerts, alarms, etc., the Goblin Bell is somewhere down there, and you need to click on that, and then you will be alerted whenever there's a new Great GM or Great Player video as it comes out. They do come out weekly. If you haven't yet heard, find me on Twitch, twitch.tv/GreatGM every Friday and Monday night, 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, Pacific Standard Time, where we do all sorts of crazy things on Friday night, and Twitch Day is basically recovering from Monday and planning for how to make our week awesome. So find me there, as well as all of the other links and things below you can utilize and obviously, well, use. Just like magic, isn't it? Anyway, oh dear, I said that word. Okay, well, for those of you that know what that means, there's an extra $1 towards the flying of the web goblin. And if you don't know what that is, join us on Twitch to find out. Until next time, happy gaming. I cast the spell of compulsion upon you. You are compelled to hit the like button, and then you are politely asked to hit the subscribe button and then share the video with all of your friends. Or, you know, counterspell it and go and enjoy the next video. Your choice.